I am Karen, 34, and today I buried my husband Hiroshi overseas. After 30 sleepless hours traveling home, I texted our family group chat, "Flight lands at 500 p.m. "Can someone pick me up?" my brother Daiichi replied. "We are busy. Try Uber." Emiko added, "Why didn't you plan better? That medical device hobby of yours caused this mess." With trembling fingers I typed, "No worries," while silently collapsing inside. I had no idea that within hours my family would be watching my tragedy unfold on their evening news. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever felt abandoned when you needed someone most. Before grief rewrote my entire existence, I had what most would call a picture-perfect life. Hiroshi and I met during my graduate program in biomedical engineering. He spilled coffee on my thesis research about cardiac monitoring devices, insisted on buying me a new laptop, and somehow managed to turn that disaster into a dinner date. We married after my graduation and built a beautiful life together in Yokohama. I worked as a medical device development engineer while Hiroshi thrived as a research and development director for an international medical equipment company. We had a cozy apartment overlooking the bay with a small balcony garden where I grew herbs for cooking. Hiroshi always joked that my precision in gardening matched my engineering skills. 10 years of marriage passed like a beautiful dream. We traveled whenever possible, collaborated on medical technology projects, and saved diligently for our future. Hiroshi and I talked about starting a family soon. We had even converted the spare bedroom into a home laboratory that could easily become a nursery when the time came. Everything changed last fall when Hiroshi was offered a 6-month contract to lead a medical infrastructure development project in Bangkok, Thailand. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, one that would advance his career tremendously and allow us to bring life-saving medical technology to underserved communities together. I arranged to work remotely for 3 months, planning to support the emergency medical device implementation while splitting our time between continents. We were so excited about the humanitarian impact ahead. The night before his departure, we had a special dinner at home. I still remember every detail: the soft music playing in the background, the flickering candles on our dining table, and the way Hiroshi looked at me when he promised this project would save countless lives and make our future even more meaningful. 6 months will fly by, he assured me, his fingers intertwined with mine. And then we will start the next chapter of both our family and our mission. We video called every day for the first 2 months. I flew out to visit him for 3 weeks around the holidays, and it felt like a second honeymoon. Bangkok was bustling, challenging, and inspiring. Hiroshi showed me around the medical facilities, introduced me to local healthcare workers, and we explored the implementation sites on weekends. Everything seemed perfect. We even started seriously discussing trying for a baby when his contract ended, knowing our child would grow up understanding the importance of helping others. Then came the call that shattered my world. I was back in Yokohama when Hiroshi complained about severe chest pain during our morning video chat. "Probably just stress," he said, rubbing his chest. "The equipment installation deadline is pushing everyone to the limit." 8 hours later, his colleague called from Hiroshi's phone. My husband had collapsed during a critical meeting with hospital administrators and been rushed to the emergency room. I booked the first available flight. But by the time I arrived 26 hours later, Hiroshi was already unconscious. Acute myocardial infarction, the doctors explained. The stress and overwork had triggered a massive heart attack. They performed emergency surgery, but the damage was catastrophic. For 5 days, I sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand, talking to him, praying for a miracle that never came. Hiroshi never regained consciousness. He was only 38 years old. The nightmare of dealing with a foreign hospital system alone was overwhelming. Every form was confusing. Every conversation was stilted through translation apps or exhausted hospital interpreters. I called my family back home daily, desperate for emotional support, but our conversations were brief. "We are praying for you," they would say before explaining why they needed to rush off the phone. Emiko asked if I had thought to purchase travel insurance. My brother Daiichi suggested I hire a local service to handle things so I could come home sooner and get back to reality. But I could not leave Hiroshi. Not like that. Not in a country where he knew only his medical colleagues. I stayed and handled everything myself. The paperwork for his death certificate took 3 full days and countless office visits. Arranging for a burial in Bangkok, because the costs of transporting his body home were prohibitively expensive, required navigating unfamiliar customs and traditions. The funeral was small, some of his medical colleagues, a few healthcare workers he had mentored, and me. No family, no lifelong friends. My parents said the flight was too expensive on short notice. My brother had critical client presentations. I stood alone as they lowered my husband into the ground, a world away from everyone we loved. The financial strain was crushing. Our insurance covered some expenses, but international policies had limitations I never thought to examine before tragedy struck. I drained our savings and maxed out credit cards to pay for everything. Through it all, I kept updating my family, hoping someone would offer more than just brief condolences or suggestions to abandon my medical device obsession. Looking back, I should not have been surprised by their response to my airport text. My family had always operated this way. When I graduated with my master's degree with highest honors, my parents attended but left immediately after the ceremony to get Daiichi to his business networking event. At my doctoral defense, they arrived late and left early. Even at my wedding, Emiko spent more time fussing over Daiichi bringing the wrong business contacts than celebrating my marriage to someone who shared my passion for saving lives. I had spent my entire life accommodating their priorities, making excuses for their complete inability to understand that medical device development was not a hobby but a calling, and telling myself that family just had different ways of showing love. Now standing at my husband's grave on the other side of the world, I finally understood that some people simply do not have the capacity to put others first, especially when those others pursue work they cannot comprehend or value. After the funeral, a whole new nightmare began. The Thai bureaucracy required multiple certified copies of death certificates, each needing to be authenticated at different government offices spread across the city. I spent 3 days shuttling between buildings in the oppressive heat, standing in endless lines and trying to explain my situation through grief-choked words. Each night I collapsed in our rented apartment, surrounded by Hiroshi's research notes and the prototype medical devices we had been developing together. On my final morning in Bangkok, I visited Hiroshi's grave one last time. The cemetery was peaceful at dawn, birds singing in the tropical trees overhead. I placed fresh flowers beside his simple headstone and sat on the dewy grass, telling him everything I was bringing home, our shared research data, the emergency monitoring device prototype he had been so excited about, our collaboration notes that represented years of work to save lives in underserved communities. "I will keep our mission alive," I whispered, pressing my palm against the cool marble. Every day for the rest of my life. My journey home stretched over 30 hours. First, a 6-hour delay in Bangkok due to mechanical issues. Then, a missed connection in Tokyo requiring an overnight stay in an airport hotel. The final leg included turbulence so severe the flight attendants remained seated for 2 hours. By the time we began our descent into Narita, I had been traveling for more than a day straight, had barely eaten, and was running purely on grief and determination to continue our work. During those endless travel hours, my mind kept returning to childhood memories, seeing patterns I had previously excused. When I was 8, I won the regional science fair with a project on heart rate monitoring. My parents took me to the ceremony, but left me with a teacher to wait while they took Daichi to his championship soccer game. "He cannot miss this," Emiko explained. "The whole team is counting on him. Science projects are just for fun." When I earned a full scholarship to pursue my master's in biomedical engineering, Taro's first question was whether it would cost them anything. Daiichi had expensive business school applications that semester, he reminded me. Graduate school was my choice, so I should handle the finances. I worked as a research assistant while Daiichi attended an expensive MBA program, fully funded by our parents. My wedding day featured Emiko criticizing my dress as impractical for someone who plays with medical gadgets, and Taro complaining about the cost of the modest venue. Daiichi showed up an hour late to the ceremony, checking his phone throughout the service. Hiroshi had noticed their behavior, but gently encouraged me to focus on our happiness instead. "We cannot change them," he said, "but we can choose how much power they have over our purpose." Throughout the funeral arrangements in Bangkok, I had called home almost daily. Most calls went to voicemail. When someone did answer, conversations were brief and focused on when I would return to normal life rather than how I was coping. Emiko suggested I was dwelling on my grief by staying for the funeral, rather than simply having Hiroshi cremated immediately. and moving on from that medical device phase. Daiichi asked if Hiroshi had life insurance before expressing concern about a client pitch he was struggling with. Despite this history, some irrational part of me believed that this tragedy, the absolute worst moment of my life, would finally elicit the respect I had always craved from my family. Surely they would recognize the magnitude of my loss and the importance of the work Hiroshi and I had been doing to save lives. 3 days before my final flight home, I messaged our family group chat with my itinerary details. The responses were minimal thumbs-up emojis from both parents and Daiichi asking if I was bringing any interesting gadgets as souvenirs. I clarified my arrival time twice more before boarding my final flight, hoping someone would offer to meet me at the airport. No one did, but I made one last attempt as we touched down on Japanese soil. My brother's "we are busy, try Uber" felt like a physical blow. Emiko's "why didn't you plan better?" That medical device hobby of yours caused this mess made me question whether I had ever truly mattered to them, beyond being the family member whose work they could dismiss as irrelevant. In that moment, sitting in a cramped airplane seat surrounded by passengers eager to disembark, I made a silent promise to Hiroshi and myself. This would be the last time I expected understanding from people who refused to see the value in saving lives. Narita International Airport buzzed with afternoon activity as I made my way through customs. The fluorescent lighting hurt my eyes after so many sleepless nights, and every announcement over the PA system made me flinch. I navigated the crowded terminal on autopilot, my body present while my mind remained thousands of miles away with Hiroshi and our shared dreams. I stood at the baggage claim, watching suitcases circle endlessly on the conveyor belt. Mine were easy to identify. One large black suitcase containing my clothes and 2 others packed with Hiroshi's research materials and our prototype devices. The things I could not bear to leave behind. Our shared laboratory notes, the emergency cardiac monitor we had been perfecting, data from years of collaborative research, the tablet containing our presentation for the medical conference we would never attend together. Fragments of our professional partnership that now represented everything I had left of our mission. My phone buzzed with another message in the family chat. I opened it hoping someone had reconsidered. "Daiichi, seriously, sis, we cannot rearrange our schedules last minute. This is why planning exists. Maybe it's time to get a real job anyway. Emiko, your father and I have dinner with the Hendersons tonight. We RSVP'd weeks ago. All this medical device nonsense needs to stop. Taro, the forecast says rain later. Drive carefully when you get home and think about what you want to do with your life now." I stared at the screen, a familiar hollow feeling spreading through my chest. Not even a question about how I was doing or if I had arrived safely. No acknowledgement of what I had just been through or the importance of the work I was carrying home. I typed a simple "no worries, I understand." And though I did not understand at all how dinner plans or social obligations could outweigh the need to support your daughter, who just buried her husband. While trying to continue their life-saving medical research alone, the weight of the equipment cases made me stagger as I loaded them onto a cart. Hiroshi's research materials suddenly felt impossibly heavy, both physically and emotionally. As I struggled toward the exit, one of the wheels on the cart stuck, sending the top equipment case crashing to the ground. It burst open, spilling our prototype devices and research documents across the polished airport floor. I dropped to my knees, frantically gathering our work as tears blurred my vision. Circuit boards, sensors, months of calibration data, the presentation slides we had prepared together. Each piece I touched unleashed fresh waves of grief for both Hiroshi and our shared vision. "Let me help you, Ma'am." An airport employee knelt beside me, gently collecting scattered components. Her name tag read Akiko. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Are you all right?" The simple question broke something inside me. When was the last time someone had asked if I was all right? Not how soon I would get over it or when I would abandon my medical device hobby, but simply if I was okay. "My husband died," I whispered. "I just buried him in Bangkok. We were developing emergency medical devices together." Akiko's expression softened with genuine compassion. She carefully helped me repack the delicate equipment, handling each prototype with respect. Then she personally escorted me to the rideshare pickup area. "Is someone coming for you?" she asked. I shook my head. "My family thinks what I do is just a hobby." Her frown spoke volumes, but she did not comment. Instead, she waited with me until the rideshare arrived. helped load my luggage with extraordinary care for the medical equipment, and squeezed my hand before I got in. "Your work sounds important," she said. "Take care of yourself." It was more understanding than my own family had ever offered. The rideshare cost 12,000 yen due to evening pricing. The driver, an older man named Tanaka-san, made polite conversation as we navigated through heavy traffic. When he asked about my trip, I gave vague answers, afraid I would shatter completely if I spoke the truth about losing both my husband and my research partner. He seemed to sense my distress and turned on soft music instead, occasionally pointing out changes to the city that had occurred in recent months. After nearly 2 hours, we pulled into my apartment complex. The building looked exactly as I had left it, yet completely different. Hiroshi would never again unlock that front door, never again carry his research bag up those stairs, never again complain about the neighbor's television being too loud during our late-night device calibration sessions. Tanaka-san helped carry my luggage and equipment cases to the entrance. As he set down the last case, he hesitated. "Are you sure you are okay, miss? You seem, well, like you might need someone." I assured him I was fine, tipped him generously, and watched his tail lights disappear down the street before fumbling with my apartment keys. The door swung open to reveal a cold, dark interior. I had asked Emiko to check the heating system the day before my arrival. She had apparently forgotten. Inside, stale air greeted me. Mail overflowed from the slot by the door, another task my family had promised to handle but clearly ignored. The refrigerator contained only expired condiments and a moldy container of something unidentifiable. Daiichi had assured me he would stock basic necessities before my return. Too exhausted to deal with any of it, I dragged the equipment cases upstairs to our home laboratory. I could not bear to sleep in our bed, so I curled up in the desk chair, surrounded by our research, still wearing my coat because the apartment was so cold. Surrounded by prototypes of devices that could save lives, I finally allowed myself to break down completely. I woke hours later, disoriented and shivering. The apartment was silent in a way it had never been when Hiroshi was alive. No keyboard clicking from late-night coding sessions, no gentle humming while he reviewed medical literature, no excited whispers when a breakthrough occurred. Just emptiness and the occasional electronic beep from standby equipment. Our shared laboratory space stood exactly as we had left it before Bangkok. My family had promised to organize the equipment to make my return easier. Inside, I found everything untouched. Hiroshi's calibration tools lined up precisely as he had left them. His favorite engineering reference book still lay open to the page he had been reading the morning he left for Thailand. Every component exactly where it had been 6 months ago, preserved like a shrine to the research we would never complete together. I sank to the floor of the laboratory, pulling his notebook into my arms, desperately searching for any lingering trace of his presence. There was nothing, just neat technical drawings and the faint smell of electronic components. I had carried pieces of our work across the ocean only to find that the pieces I had left behind no longer felt like our shared passion at all. Morning arrived with a strange rumbling sound from downstairs. Stiff from sleeping in the chair, I made my way down to investigate. The noise grew louder as I approached the kitchen, and when I flipped on the light switch, I gasped in horror. The apartment building had suffered structural damage during a recent earthquake. Cracks ran along the walls, and debris had fallen from the ceiling, crushing several pieces of furniture. The tremor had also damaged our home laboratory upstairs. I ran back up to find our most sensitive equipment scattered and broken, months of calibration data corrupted, and the prototype cardiac monitor Hiroshi and I had been perfecting completely destroyed. The building must have sustained damage during the seismic activity that occurred while I was in Bangkok. If someone had checked on the apartment as promised, they would have discovered the destruction and secured our research equipment. I stood among the wreckage of our life's work, staring at the devastation, feeling oddly detached. After everything else, this almost seemed inevitable. Of course, my homecoming would include the destruction of everything Hiroshi and I had built together. Outside, aftershocks continued to rattle the building. The local news had been warning about ongoing seismic instability for days, according to notifications on my phone. My family must have known about the earthquake when they suggested I drive carefully. Yet, no one had thought to ensure the apartment or our research equipment was secure. I called an emergency building inspector, only to be told they were backed up for weeks due to similar issues across the prefecture. "We are looking at next month at the earliest," the dispatcher explained apologetically. The earthquake has everyone calling in with structural concerns. My next call was to my brother. Daiichi answered on the fourth ring, his voice distracted. Hey, I cannot really talk right now. Getting ready for that client dinner I mentioned. The apartment building was damaged in an earthquake, I said flatly. Our research equipment is destroyed. There is structural damage everywhere, and the building might not be safe. Could I possibly stay with you until this gets sorted out? The silence that followed told me everything before he even spoke. Actually, tonight is really bad timing. Yuki and I have the Yamadas coming over. Potential clients I have been trying to land for months. And our guest room is full of her craft supplies right now. Have you called Mom and Dad? Maybe it's time to give up this medical device thing anyway. I ended that call and tried my parents next. Emiko answered with immediate excuses. Oh, honey, you know we would normally say yes. But the neighborhood association is meeting here tomorrow, and we have spent all day preparing. Plus, your father's back has been acting up. We just cannot handle guests right now. What about a hotel? You should have insurance for that sort of thing. And maybe this is a sign that you should find more practical work. By this point, I had not eaten a proper meal in over 24 hours. The international travel, grief, and now this crisis had left me physically depleted. I felt lightheaded and nauseated as I tried to navigate through the debris-filled apartment to find anything edible. The power flickered ominously as aftershocks continued. I managed to locate a package of rice crackers in a cupboard and ate them mechanically while standing among the ruins of our laboratory. My extremities were beginning to go numb from the cold and shock, but I could not seem to make myself care enough to find warm clothes. Everything felt distant and unimportant. In a last desperate attempt to salvage something, anything, I decided to check if our backup server in the basement storage area had survived the earthquake. The basement stairs were cracked and unstable, and I gripped the railing tightly as I made my way down. The storage area was partially flooded from burst pipes, with water reaching my ankles. I waded toward our backup equipment on the far wall, using my phone flashlight to guide me. As I reached for the server case, my foot slipped on the wet concrete. I fell forward, my hand instinctively bracing against the metal electrical junction box on the wall. A sharp jolt of electricity shot through my arm, throwing me backward. My head struck something hard as I fell, and for a moment everything went dark. I came to on the basement floor, disoriented and shivering violently. My right arm tingled painfully from the electrical shock, and something warm trickled down the side of my face. When I touched my temple, my fingers came away red with blood. The fall had left a gash just above my eyebrow. Struggling to my feet, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The basement seemed to tilt and spin around me as I staggered toward the stairs. Each step required immense concentration. Halfway up, I had to stop and sit, my vision blurring at the edges. By the time I reached the main floor again, I was barely conscious. I collapsed onto the sofa in the living room, unable to go any further. The apartment had grown colder still, and I could no longer feel my fingers or toes. Some distant part of my mind recognized the symptoms of hypothermia setting in, but I could not summon the energy to care. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, a high-pitched beeping penetrated the fog in my brain. The gas leak detector was going off. Something was wrong with the building's gas system. Perhaps damaged by the earthquake or malfunctioning due to the structural instability. Toxic gas was filling the apartment while I lay incapacitated, unable to reach help. My phone lay on the coffee table just inches from my hand, yet it might as well have been miles away. My limbs refused to cooperate, and darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. In what I believed might be my final conscious moments, a strange calm settled over me. If this was how it ended, at least I would be with Hiroshi again. At least the pain would stop. And maybe together we could continue our work in whatever comes after. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness completely was the sound of someone pounding on the front door and a voice calling out. Then nothing but darkness. I later learned that Yuki Nakamura, my neighbor from the unit below, had noticed water and debris falling from my apartment ceiling into her living room. Concerned, she had tried calling first, then came up to investigate. When no one answered her knocks but she heard the gas leak alarm blaring inside, she immediately called emergency services. The firefighters broke down the door to find me unconscious on the sofa. The apartment dangerously cold and partially damaged, with gas levels well above the safety threshold. According to the paramedics who transported me to Yokohama General Hospital, I was suffering from moderate hypothermia, gas poisoning, a concussion, and the effects of an electrical shock. A few more hours, and we would have been looking at a very different outcome. One of them reportedly told the emergency room doctor. At the hospital, the medical team worked quickly to raise my body temperature and administer oxygen to counteract the gas poisoning in my system. They cleaned and stitched the gash on my temple, monitored my heart for any arrhythmias caused by the electrical shock, and conducted neurological tests to assess the severity of my concussion. When they found my passport with the recent Bangkok stamps and noticed my wedding ring, a compassionate nurse named Mariko gently asked about my circumstances. In my semi-conscious state, I apparently told her everything: Hiroshi's death, the overseas funeral, my family's dismissal of my medical device research as a hobby, and returning to a damaged apartment where years of life-saving research had been destroyed. Mariko documented it all in my medical chart, concerned about my lack of support system upon discharge. What neither of us knew was that a local reporter named Sato-san was at the hospital covering earthquake-related injuries for the evening news. He overheard a paramedic discussing my case in the break room. The bizarre confluence of tragedy that led to a biomedical engineer being found near death after losing both her husband and her research equipment. The human interest angle was too compelling to ignore. Sato-san interviewed Yuki, who shared that she had seen me arrive home by rideshare the previous afternoon. She looked exhausted, completely drained, Yuki told the camera. I meant to go welcome her back, but with the earthquake damage, I got busy preparing my own apartment for inspection. I feel terrible now, knowing what she was going through alone. He also spoke with the paramedics who responded to the call. One of them, visibly moved by the situation, shared the text message exchange he had seen on my phone, which was still open to the family group chat when they found me. Here is someone who just lost her husband while working on medical devices that could save lives, asking her family for a simple ride from the airport. And they basically told her to get an Uber and find a real job. Then she comes home to find her research destroyed and no one checking on her safety. It is just heartbreaking. By evening, the story had made it to the local news. Biomedical engineer returns from husband's overseas funeral to near tragedy. The report detailed how I had buried my husband in Bangkok, travelled over 30 hours to return home, been denied basic support from family members who dismissed my medical research, and then nearly died due to a preventable household emergency that destroyed years of life-saving device development. Social media amplified the story rapidly. Screenshots of the text exchange shared by someone at the hospital spread across local community groups and eventually reached wider platforms. The contrast between my simple request for support and my family's dismissive responses about my medical device hobby struck a chord with viewers, especially those in the medical and engineering communities. The hashtag Medical Devices Matter began trending locally, with people sharing their own stories of family members who dismissed technical careers and scientific research. Local businesses and medical institutions responded with offers of assistance. A medical device company volunteered to provide new equipment at no cost. An engineering firm offered laboratory space, and a hotel chain provided a complimentary 2-week stay while repairs were completed. The community outpouring was overwhelming and unexpected. That evening, as the 10 o'clock news aired the story with footage of emergency vehicles outside my apartment building, my family saw their private conversation broadcast for all to see. According to the night nurse who was in my hospital room when they arrived, my brother Daiichi burst in first, his face ashen. "We just saw the news," he stammered. "They are making it sound like we abandoned you." Emiko followed, already on the defensive. "This is a complete misrepresentation," she told the nurse before even acknowledging me. "We had no idea the building was in such condition. Karen knows we would have helped if we understood the situation. All this medical device business has always been impractical anyway." Taro stood silently by the door, his expression unreadable. Only when the nurse stepped out did he approach my bed and ask quietly, "Are you going to be okay?" It was the first genuine question any of them had asked since Hiroshi died. Within minutes of their arrival, my phone began ringing incessantly with calls from extended family and family friends who had seen the news report. My Aunt Sachiko called Emiko directly, demanding to know why no one had gone to the airport. Taro's supervisor texted to express concern and offer assistance. The family's carefully maintained image of loving support was crumbling under public scrutiny. As I drifted in and out of sleep, I could hear them in the hallway outside my room, arguing in hushed voices about how to fix the situation, Daiichi insisted they needed to get ahead of the story before it damaged his professional reputation. Emiko worried about what her neighborhood association would think. Taro suggested they simply move me to their house once I was discharged to show everyone they cared. Not once in their discussions did I hear genuine remorse or understanding of the importance of the work I had lost. It was all about appearances, damage control, and their own discomfort. Even in this moment of crisis, they could not see beyond themselves to recognize the value of medical research that could save lives. When the hospital social worker arrived to discuss my discharge plan, she brought news that the community support was continuing to grow. A local medical device research group had reached out, offering laboratory space and equipment. A meal delivery service had donated 2 weeks of prepared foods. Several colleagues from the medical engineering community had volunteered to help rebuild my research setup. "You have options," the social worker assured me. "You do not have to go with your family if that is not what you want." It was the first time anyone had acknowledged that I had a choice, that I was not obligated to accept help wrapped in dismissal of my life's work simply because it came from blood relatives. As my family hovered anxiously, waiting to implement their damage control plan, I closed my eyes and thought of Hiroshi. He had always encouraged me to stand up for myself with my family, to demand that they recognize the value of our medical research. "Your worth is not determined by their ability to understand it," he would say. Now, lying in a hospital bed after nearly dying alone while my life's work lay in ruins, I finally understood what he meant. By morning, my condition had stabilized enough for longer periods of consciousness. The hospital room felt crowded with my family's presence. They had taken shifts through the night, ensuring someone was always visible by my bedside, particularly when hospital staff entered the room. The performance was flawless yet utterly hollow. Daiichi sat scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up to ask if I needed anything, then returning to what appeared to be damage control on social media. Emiko arranged and rearranged the few items on my bedside table, filling the silence with comments about how this whole situation has been blown completely out of proportion, and maybe it's time to pursue more practical work. Taro stood by the window, periodically sighing and checking his watch. When Dr. Ishida entered to discuss my condition and discharge plan, Emiko immediately transformed, her voice softening as she touched my arm. "We are just so grateful she is all right. We will be taking her home with us, of course. Our family sticks together during difficult times." The doctor nodded professionally while reviewing my chart. "Watanabe-san has experienced significant trauma, both physical and emotional. Her recovery will require rest, proper nutrition, warm surroundings, and minimal stress." He looked directly at me, not Emiko, as he spoke. "What support system do you have in place, Karen?" Before I could answer, Daiichi jumped in. "She has us. We are her family. There was just a misunderstanding about her arrival time yesterday, which the media has completely distorted. Maybe this is a good time for her to reconsider her career path anyway." Dr. Ishida maintained his professional demeanor. "I see. And will someone be available to stay with her continuously for the next 48 hours? The concussion requires monitoring, and she should not be left alone." "Of course," Emiko replied smoothly. "We have already prepared the guest room. I can rearrange my schedule to be home. Though perhaps we should discuss more stable living arrangements than this medical device research." A nurse named Yuki entered with my medication and a breakfast tray. She had been caring for me since early morning and had witnessed my family's performance shift whenever medical staff entered. As she checked my vitals, she quietly asked, "Are you comfortable with this plan, Karen?" "Because there are alternatives if you need them." Emiko stiffened. "Alternatives? She is coming home with her family where she belongs, away from all this impractical medical research." Yuki met my eyes steadily, ignoring Emiko's interjection. "The choice is yours," she said simply. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The choice was mine. Not what would make my family look good, not what would preserve their social standing, but what I actually needed to continue the work that Hiroshi and I believed in. I took a deep breath. "I would like to hear about the alternatives," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. The room fell silent. Daiichi stopped typing mid-text. Emiko's mouth opened and closed without sound. Taro turned from the window with a frown. "Karin," Emiko finally managed, "you cannot be serious. After everything we have done." "What exactly have you done?" The question escaped me before I could reconsider. But once spoken, I could not take it back, nor did I want to. "When Hiroshi was dying, you were too busy to come. When I buried him alone, you said flights were too expensive. When I needed a ride from the airport after 30 hours of travel, you suggested Uber and told me to abandon my medical research. When I called about the earthquake damage that destroyed years of work, you prioritized client dinners and social obligations. My voice remained calm, factual rather than accusatory. So please tell me what you have done that entitles you to control my recovery now that people are watching. Daiichi stood abruptly. That is completely unfair. We did not know how serious. And honestly, this medical device thing has never been practical. It's time to be realistic. You did not ask, I interrupted. Not once did any of you ask how I was really doing or show any respect for the life-saving research Hiroshi and I were conducting. Not once did you offer genuine help without dismissing our work as a hobby. You did not need to see me on the news to know I was grieving and alone. You chose not to see it because it was easier to dismiss what you couldn't understand. Emiko's face flushed with indignation. We have always supported you, Karen. Perhaps not in the exact way you wanted, but families cannot drop everything for every crisis. Your expectations are simply unrealistic and frankly, so is this medical device obsession? Needing a ride from the airport after burying my husband while trying to continue our life-saving research is an unrealistic expectation, I asked quietly. Hoping someone might have checked that my home and research equipment was safe during an earthquake was asking too much. We are busy people, Daiichi insisted. We cannot be expected to remember every little detail about your hobbies. Every little detail, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Like whether your newly widowed sister might die alone while trying to preserve medical research that could save lives. Taro finally spoke, his voice subdued. Karen, we understand you are upset. Grief can make people say things they do not mean. When you are thinking more clearly, maybe you'll see that it's time for more practical work. I am thinking more clearly than I have in years, I interrupted. For the first time, I see our family dynamic without making excuses for it. I see that I have spent my entire life accepting dismissal of my calling and convincing myself it was support. Yuki had remained in the room, quietly arranging my medication. Her presence somehow gave me strength to continue. I do not hate you, I said, looking at each of them in turn. I do not even blame you for being unable to understand the importance of medical research. But I will no longer pretend that you can give me what I need right now, or that you would even if you could comprehend the value of saving lives. So what are you saying? Emiko demanded. You would rather stay with strangers than your own family, continue this medical device nonsense? I am saying I choose to prioritize my healing and my research over maintaining our family's image. I choose to surround myself with people who understand that developing devices to save lives is not a hobby but a mission. The social worker, Miss Tanaka, entered with a folder of information. My family fell silent, aware of how a continued argument might appear. Miss Tanaka explained the community resources that had been arranged a 2-week stay at the Bayview Hotel while my home was repaired. Meal delivery services, transportation to medical appointments, and most importantly, laboratory space donated by the Yokohama Medical Device Research Institute to continue my work. Several colleagues from the biomedical engineering community have also volunteered to help rebuild your research setup, she added. And the medical device company working on your building's restoration has offered to provide new equipment and funding to continue the cardiac monitoring project you were developing with your husband. The contrast between this outpouring from people who understood the value of life-saving research and my family's reluctant, dismissive support could not have been more stark. While my family stared in stunned silence, I accepted the arrangements presented by Miss Tanaka. This is ridiculous, Daiichi finally sputtered. You are choosing random people over your own blood for some medical device fantasy. I looked at my brother. Really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. I am choosing understanding over dismissal. I am choosing to value myself and my work enough to accept help that comes without conditions or the demand to abandon my calling. Emiko gathered her purse, her movements stiff with indignation. When you come to your senses and give up this medical device obsession, we will be waiting. But do not expect us to drop everything again when you decide you need practical advice. That is exactly my point, I replied softly. I never could expect respect for my work from you, and now I no longer will. As they filed out of the room, Taro lingered briefly at the door. For a moment I thought he might say something meaningful, something that acknowledged the importance of the research that could save lives. Instead, he simply nodded once before following Emiko and Daichi. Yuki approached my bedside after they left. "That took incredible courage," she said, adjusting my pillows. "Setting boundaries with family is one of the hardest things to do, especially when you are vulnerable and your life's work is at stake." "It does not feel like courage," I admitted. "It feels like giving up on them." "You are not giving up," she corrected gently. "You are giving yourself permission to heal and continue your important work without carrying their dismissal too. There is a big difference." That afternoon, representatives from the various community services and medical institutions came to coordinate my discharge plan. The hotel manager assured me that everything was prepared for my arrival. The Medical Device Research Institute showed me photos of the laboratory space they had prepared, complete with state-of-the-art equipment for cardiac monitoring research. The meal service coordinator discussed dietary preferences and delivery schedules. Each interaction reinforced what Yuki had said. This was not about rejecting family. It was about accepting genuine support for work that could save lives without having to earn it or apologize for pursuing it. It was about recognizing that sometimes the family we are born into cannot provide what we need to continue our mission. And that is not a failure on our part. By evening, I was settled in a comfortable suite at the Bayview Hotel, overlooking the harbour that gave the city its character. The room was warm, the bed soft, and a desk had been set up with basic research materials to help me begin rebuilding our work. On the nightstand sat a small cardiac monitoring device with a card signed by hospital staff who understood the importance of my research. For the first time since Hiroshi died, I felt something besides grief and abandonment. It was not happiness that seemed impossibly distant still, but perhaps it was the first fragile seedling of renewed purpose. I had stood in my truth, honoured our work, and discovered that there was understanding in the world beyond the narrow confines of familial dismissal. As I watched the sun set over the harbour, I whispered to Hiroshi as if he could hear me. "I think you would be proud of me today. I finally did what you always said I should. I stood up for our research." I could almost hear his reply, "I have always been proud of you and our work." It was the world you needed to make proud. 3 months passed in a blur of slow, steady healing and renewed research. My physical recovery progressed more quickly than expected. The concussion symptoms faded after several weeks of rest. The electrical burn on my hand left only a faint mark that the doctor assured me would eventually disappear completely. The gash on my temple healed into a thin, silver line, partly hidden by my hairline. The emotional healing and research restoration proved more challenging, but equally rewarding. With the help of the grief support group that met in a medical center conference room every Tuesday and Thursday, I began to process not only the loss of Hiroshi, but also the complicated feelings surrounding my family's inability to understand the importance of our work. The group facilitator, Dr. Yamamoto, had a gentle way of asking questions that helped me see patterns without judgment. "Grief has a way of clarifying what truly matters," Dr. Yamamoto often said. "It strips away pretense and forces us to confront truth, both beautiful and painful, about what we value most." My research restoration mirrored my internal healing. The Medical Device Institute not only provided laboratory space, but gave me access to equipment I had never dreamed of using. They upgraded my cardiac monitoring project with cutting-edge sensors, enhanced the data processing capabilities, and connected me with international researchers working on similar life-saving devices. What began as destruction became an opportunity for breakthrough innovation. Throughout this process, colleagues I barely knew before became regular fixtures in my research life. Dr. Sato from the cardiac unit brought clinical insights every week. Engineer Watanabe and programmer Tanaka from the institute helped debug my monitoring algorithms. Dr. Liu, a visiting researcher from Singapore, simply collaborated with me on difficult days when innovation required multiple perspectives, but breakthroughs seemed elusive. My family maintained a careful distance. Occasional text messages arrived, superficially pleasant but lacking any acknowledgement of our hospital room confrontation or respect for my research. Emiko sent a generic "thinking of you" card signed by all 3 of them. Daichi called once, ostensibly to check on me, but really to mention that his clients had seen the news story and he wanted to clarify any misconceptions about my practical career prospects. Taro sent an email with links to traditional job opportunities, his only concession that anything significant had happened. I responded politely but briefly to each contact, no longer expecting deeper connection or understanding of my work's importance. The boundary I had established in the hospital remained firm, not as punishment but as protection for my healing heart and developing research. I could not afford to deplete my limited emotional resources on relationships that consistently dismissed what Hiroshi and I had dedicated our lives to achieving. 6 months after Hiroshi's death, I established the Hiroshi Takahashi Memorial Fund for International Medical Device Development at our alma mater. Using the life insurance funds that had finally been processed, I created an endowment that would help biomedical engineering students develop emergency medical devices for underserved communities, with research support systems in place. The fund specifically covered international collaboration expenses and emergency family support, exactly what I had lacked when crisis struck halfway around the world. Working on the fund details gave me purpose during the darkest hours of grief. Each provision I included reflected a lesson learned through painful experience. Each safeguard represented a hardship that future researchers and their families might be spared. Hiroshi had always valued innovation and humanitarian impact. This felt like the perfect way to honor his memory while transforming my pain into something that could save lives. On what would have been our 11th anniversary, I hosted a small gathering at the Research Institute to announce the fund's first recipient. Close friends and colleagues who had supported me through everything joined the celebration, along with new researcher friends made during my recovery journey. My family received invitations but sent regrets, citing prior commitments. As I presented the research grant to Kenji, a bright-eyed graduate student planning to develop emergency monitoring devices for rural communities, I felt Hiroshi's presence more strongly than I had since his death, not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as the enduring impact of the mission we had shared. His influence remained in how I approached research challenges, in my capacity for innovation, and in my ability to create life-saving technology from personal suffering. This fund exists because of a great love and a profound mission, I told the small audience gathered in the laboratory, but also because of an unexpected lesson that true family can be found in the most surprising places, formed not necessarily by blood, but by who shows up when showing up matters most, especially when the work involves saving lives. The following week, I received a letter from Taro, an actual handwritten letter, something I had never received from him before. Unlike the superficial communications of previous months, this one contained something rare reflection. I have been thinking about what happened after you returned from Bangkok, he wrote. While your mother and brother may never see it clearly, I want you to know that I recognize our failure, not just in the practical matters of airport rides and apartment maintenance, but in the deeper obligation to support your important work during your darkest hours. I have no excuses to offer, only a late and insufficient acknowledgement. The man you married would be proud of the researcher you have become in his absence. Perhaps someday, if you are willing, we might find a way forward, not as we were, but as we could be, with respect for the lives your work saves. I did not respond immediately. The letter required contemplation, not reaction. I discussed it with my therapist, who had been helping me navigate grief and family dynamics for several months. What do you want from a relationship with your father? She asked. Not what you think you should want or what might make him feel better, but what would actually support your well-being and research. The question stayed with me for days. Eventually, I wrote back with boundaries and expectations clearly stated. I expressed willingness for occasional meetings, just the two of us, with the understanding that these conversations were exploratory, not obligatory. I would not be returning to family gatherings or holiday celebrations in the immediate future. Any relationship moving forward would be based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for the importance of life-saving medical research, not performance or dismissal. To my surprise, he agreed to these terms without argument. Our first meeting was awkward but civil. The second slightly less so. By the third, we had found a careful rhythm of conversation that acknowledged our history without being defined by it. And more importantly, that showed genuine interest in my research. It was not the close father-daughter bond some might envy, but it was authentic in a way our previous relationship had never been. And it respected the work that defined my purpose. Daiichi and Emiko maintained their distance, occasionally sending holiday cards or impersonal gifts, but never addressing the fundamental issues that had led to our estrangement. or acknowledging the importance of medical device research. I accepted this as their choice and focused my energy on relationships and collaborations that nourished both my healing and my research rather than depleting them. A year after Hiroshi's death, I stood alone at the airport, waiting for a flight that would take me back to Bangkok to visit his grave on the anniversary, and also to meet with medical colleagues continuing the device implementation project. As I watched families reunite around me, the embraces, the excited chatter, the genuine joy of reconnection, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was still sadness for what my own family could not provide, but no longer the desperate longing of before. I had learned that family could be created and chosen. That support could come from unexpected sources. That boundaries were not walls but healthy filters that allowed understanding in while keeping dismissal at bay. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth and the value of my work were not determined by others' ability to recognize them. As I boarded the plane, I thought about how differently this journey felt from my return trip a year ago. Then I had been broken by grief and abandonment, desperate for connection and support that never came, watching years of research lie in ruins. Now I carried within me a community of understanding that existed regardless of physical proximity. People who had shown up when it mattered most. People who continued to support life-saving research day after day in ways both large and small. The greatest lesson from that terrible homecoming was not about my family's failures or the painful consequences that followed. It was about the remarkable capacity of human beings to step forward and support each other's vital work. About the healing power of being truly understood in your darkest moments. About the professional family we create when the one we were born into cannot meet our needs or respect our calling. If you have ever felt dismissed when you needed support most for work that matters, please know that you are not alone. Your worth and the importance of your mission are not determined by others' capacity to understand them. Sometimes the people we expect to support us simply cannot provide what we need due to their own limitations, not the lack of value in our work. The challenge is to remain open to unexpected sources of care and collaboration, even when previous experience makes that openness feel dangerous, and to never stop believing in the importance of saving lives.